Yes, hi, good evening and welcome to our very first YouTube live lecture hosted by Die Neue Sammlung, the Design Museum. My name is Caroline Fuchs and I'm a curator here at the museum. First, I'm very sorry for the delay and thank you all for staying with us. I hope we will all enjoy tonight's program very much. This talk is part of the Connection series and supported by UI. So first, the present situation sometimes calls for unusual settings, so you should know that I'm speaking to you from my home. And ASIF Khan will also speak from his home. We're not at Pinakothek der Moderne. And on this note, I want to give a huge thanks to everyone behind the scenes who made this possible, also on short notice. So tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome ASIF Khan from London, who will be joining us very shortly. But before we bring him into the talk, I would like to introduce him to you. So our guest tonight is the founder of the London-based architecture studio ASIF Khan Limited. Since its foundation in 2007, he has worked on a large variety of international projects, ranging from exhibition and cultural buildings to installation and landscapes. He has won several prestigious awards, among them the Cannes Lion Grand Prix for Innovation Award for his Megafaces installation, several awards for his We Are Energy Pavilion that represented the UK at the Astana Expo in 2017. And the same year, he also received an MBE, a Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for services to architecture. Now, his most recent work, which you may have seen in the press, includes the entry portals to the Dubai Expo 2020 that pioneer a new use of carbon fiber by creating an enormous structure that is at the same time incredibly thin and incredibly light. So last year, Die Neue Sammlung, our museum, was extremely lucky to have an exhibition designed by him. It was titled A Different Perspective, African Ceramics from the Collection of Franz, Duke of Bavaria. It opened last year in September and closed amidst the lockdown in April this year. Thanks to ASIF Khan design, we were able to show this very unique collection in a very unique setting that provided different spaces for the exhibition and made it possible to view the objects from very different perspectives. So I'm very curious what new perspectives on space and architecture he will show us tonight. But before I hand over to ASIF, here's an important notice to the audience. We invite you to type in questions during the talk into the YouTube chat. We will collect these questions during the talk, and I will pose as many of them as we have time for after ASIF's presentation. And now I'm very pleased to invite ASIF to join us online. Welcome, ASIF.
Hi, Caroline. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, ASIF? Very good to see you.
Good.
So, yes, great. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very glad that we can do this, even though we cannot do it in person. Yes, so I'm very curious about your great exhibition talk. So please.
Okay, I'll take it away. Thank you, Caroline. So, thanks everyone for joining this evening. And I think we have about an hour, and the final, I think 15 minutes of that or something is for like discussion and questions. So I hope you can save up some thoughts so we can have a bit of interaction. I'm really open to hear your perspectives. It's obviously a time when all of us have been doing thinking, sitting at home. Maybe some of us have been unfortunate enough, or we have members of our family who've caught COVID and had to really suffer and so on. And others of us who have been on the sidelines watching all that happen have spent a lot of time digesting and kind of trying to make sense of where the world is now. And so with this talk, I thought I would do a little bit of some thinking about that, but within the context of exhibition design and within the context of leading to the work that we did with Caroline and her team on this exhibition of African ceramics at Die Neue Sammlung. So I think all of us have felt that the internet has been both a great friend and a great enemy during this time, during the last 4 or 5 months. And whilst it's provided a lot of, let's say, diversion, and maybe it started to achieve its sort of a potential as kind of this repository of all knowledge, all possible information, all possible conversations that can happen at once, like the greatest exhibition that there could ever be. I think at the same time, it's proved a great distraction. And all of the kind of amazing thoughts that we could have been having during the last few months sometimes end up in places where we don't expect. And this kind of idea of the rabbit hole, and depending on this medium, which is meant to lead us somewhere really wonderful, from objects from around the world, but in the end, we might discover we're just looking at pizza. This is like the experience of for me every day that I'm having. And I think it's a little bit like this tower of the Library of Babel, which Borges imagined, which was, in a way, an infinite space, books, an infinite number of books in an infinite library. And the idea that all knowledge is in there somewhere. Everything we could ever imagine is in these hexagonal rooms, which run infinitely in X and Y directions, but also up and down. And at the same time as being a kind of utopia and the kind of repository of all knowledge possible, it's also a kind of hell. And I think we find ourselves a little bit in that place as unguided explorers, constantly seeking knowledge and encountering knowledge, but never being able to turn that knowledge into wisdom. And that is something that I hope, and I kind of want to make the argument for, is the great value of exhibition design and curation in this infinite territory of the digital world, which we're kind of on the cusp of and we're experiencing at the moment. That we need to edit and turn information into stories and into things that everyday people can understand. And that's a job of the exhibition designer and a job of the curator. So working together. Let's remind ourselves of the first museum. And this is, if I take you back 500 years before the birth of Christ, we're in modern-day Iraq, but this was Neo-Babylon at the time. And the daughter of the then emperor of the civilization, Ennigal-Didnani, she put together an exhibition in what is thought of as the first museum in the world. And at least we know that because items have been discovered from there, which were items which related to across about 2,000 years of history, but they were all found in one room. And it was assumed by the archaeologists at the time, I think in the 1920s when they first discovered it, that these were, let's say, the first exhibition. And what was inside that exhibition was an attempt by Ennigal-Didnani to curate an experience, to tell a story about the previous dynasties, which their dynasty was a continuation of. So it was a narrative, and all that was left of that museum was this clay series of cylinders, which are thought of as the world's first museum labels. And what these cuneiform cylinders showed that there were a variety of visitors to this exhibition. It was in a number of different dialects, which meant that they would receive guests who would look at these objects and understand the narrative that they were trying to express about themselves and where their dynasty was in the kind of story of time, and perhaps give a suggestion of where it was going in the future. Now, if we sort of fast forward to what's called the Great Exhibition of 1851, this is a kind of another, I think, big important landmark in time. You see here a napkin sketch of a piece of architecture, but the piece of architecture was essentially not just a container for the exhibition, but in my opinion, it was the exhibition itself. And the Great Exhibition of 1851 was conceived by the then Prince Albert, who was the husband of Queen Victoria, and he, a German, he came with very new ideas to, let's say, radically recharge this moment at the end of the Industrial Revolution, and to create an exhibition that was unmatched anywhere in the world. The image you're seeing is of Joseph Paxton, who was his architect. And he was a gentleman who was a garden designer originally, and then a guy who made garden structures. He wasn't even a real engineer. He made conservatory structures for some of the great houses in history. They had about 100 entries to their competition for a building for this great exhibition. An exhibition of all of the riches of the British Empire, all of the wonderful objects and carpets and lions' heads and everything you can imagine, the cornucopia, to show the greatness of the empire. But every design they came up with wasn't able to reach the budget and the kind of time requirements they had. What Paxton did is he combined his knowledge of engineering of garden structures, the great lily house he made at Chatsworth, for example, and what was possible in the world of iron construction with iron and glass. And he conceived of an architecture which was modular, mass-produced, and scalable. And he was able to make a building that was, at the time, the largest building in the world. The building was so large, it's in Hyde Park in London, that it actually encompassed around 10 elm trees, which were on the site itself. Now, for us now, this seems sort of like normal, right? But no one had ever, firstly, created a form of architecture which had such rapid construction and durability. And they had never conceived of the idea of the inside and the outside being blended together. The idea of greenery on the inside of a building, that you were using completely conventionally, was unheard of. But he also conceived of the wall of a building as glass. It's something we take for granted today. But if you think about every glass and steel building you see everywhere in the world, it is this building in 1851 was a blueprint for that. We would be in a very, very different place in our cities if this building hadn't been designed and hadn't been conceived of for the great exhibition. So my kind of thought is that this building itself is the exhibition itself. Even though the things inside the exhibition, locomotives and bizarre objects like this, maybe the very first Alexa, I don't know. But the building itself was the greatest manifesto for what the Industrial Revolution could produce. And every message that Albert wanted to tell the world at the Great Exhibition was told by that building. So the building was part of the exhibition. And if we fast forward to Expo 1970, which was held in Osaka in Japan, this is the kind of master plan, the blueprint. A similar thing happened where rather than the structures of the exhibition being thought of as an independent architecture, they became expressive themselves of that moment in time. And they kind of not only told the story of where we were, but also what the future would hold for us. So you see here one of the large structures at the center of the Expo, which is above us, this enormous super frame structure, which itself has modular buildings installed in it. If you look underneath that, there was a great plaza and a place where performance could happen in a kind of liberal, free way, kind of new ideas of public space usage. The famous Nagakin capsule hotel was featured there. You have kind of these early structures. These are things that we're probably not ready to build now, but even in 20, 30 years, we can imagine Elon Musk building this stuff. It's starting to become possible. This is modular architecture. It's really the future. And here you have some robotic structures which were done by Arata Isozaki. Some of the great architects of the time, Kishikurokawa, Isozaki, Kenzo Tange, they were all involved in this, and they went on to form this movement called metabolism, which was at its beginning point in those days, and then went on to become like probably the most important post-war architectural movement in Japan. So that is the exhibition design again, just like at our 1851 Great Exhibition, the architecture and the exhibition design were one thing, and they reinforced the manifesto of the exhibition, and they led the path very much to the future. Okay, so this is Tange's big project in Tokyo Bay, which was inspired by all of that movement going on at the same time. Now I'm going to go forward another 50 years from 1970s. This is in now 2020. This is this year, and this is the master plan of the Dubai Expo. And this is so finally, after being a fan of the Great Exhibition, and actually I grew up in South London in an area just next to Crystal Palace, which is the name for the hall that Joseph Paxton made in 1851. All the streets, the pub on my street is called the Crystal Palace Tavern, in fact. So I grew up around this, and as a kid I was taken there. I never would imagine that I would get to design elements of this master plan, but we were invited to do the entire public realm design of this. So all of the streets and the arrival sequence and anything that's not a kind of a pavilion, this was our job to create the infrastructure. But in our mind, it shouldn't just be infrastructure; it should be exhibition design itself. It should be the task is to kind of curate the narrative for the expo. And this expo is about sort of, in my mind, was about two things: communicating the history and heritage of the region, the Middle East, and let's say the Arab and Islamic world region, with pride to the world, because there's going to be 22 million visitors, and at the same time to communicate the potential of the future. So with our entrances that we created, and this is one of them that Caroline mentioned in the introduction, we worked with the most kind of advanced carbon fiber engineering, which actually we worked with a fantastic company in Bavaria, which was a fantastic global collaboration of like the best engineers and material scientists. And so this is in collaboration with them, and we created the structure which was kind of combining like the future of construction with Islamic geometry, with algebra, with mathematics. So it looks to the past and it looks to the future. And the idea that every person who enters these doors, these great doors, I mean, they're 21 meters high, at Expo, would understand not just that it's a landmark and it's fantastic, you can go through this thing, but they feel the subtle feeling of temperature change from the shading, because it acts as a mashrabiyah, which is an Arabic screen. They also, in closer inspection, they find it's made out of material which they don't even understand, and it's using an amount of material that is so minimal that they can't comprehend it. So all of this collection of things, it's an experience which is spatial and immersive, but it is explaining the primary curatorial concept of the Expo, which is about the past and the future kind of meeting together and forming inspiration for the next generation. So we also took that idea through the whole of the public realm with all the streets and the lighting and the vegetation that we designed, the landscaping and so on. So the whole experience of moving around there is an exhibition without you even realizing it, that you understand something about the region, something about how it's changing and what it can offer the future with just moving around through it. So this was a kind of contribution of ours to this long history of world expos that we hope kind of was a conversation with 1851 and with 1970 Osaka, but in a way that's specific to the region and in a way that only the region could do, which is very interesting. When you look at the map of world expos, you discover that there's never been any in the Middle East, North Africa, even in Central Asia, which I'll show you later. It was only in 2017 that one appeared. Okay, so I'm going to move forward to another project, and this is another interesting example of thinking about the relationship between architecture and exhibition design. This is in London. This building you're seeing here is the Smithfield Meat Market, which is in London. If you know the area of Farringdon, it has been a major landmark in Farringdon for the past 1,000 years. In fact, it's where London's meat market has sort of always been. Charles Dickens wrote about it, and he called it it's a filthy place. He talked about it as a place of filth and blood and fat and foam. So it's a stinking, very masculine, very aggressive place. But in the 1880s, there was an act to kind of remove a government act to remove all of the kind of messiness and to house it in these buildings. So the city architect at the time, Horace Jones, created these buildings to house a kind of cleaner market. But since the 1990s, I'd say they've been in decline, and a number of the buildings have been derelict, now for like 25 years or something. So the Museum of London, a number of years ago, was starting to run out of space. It has 7 million objects in its collection, all sorts of things, ephemera and kind of from architectural elements of buildings to sort of daily things from people's lives. And it was running out of space, and the idea of making a new museum on the site of this historic market came up. So to convert a market building into a museum, that's a kind of really complex idea because a market isn't a museum, and the transformation of that sort is quite challenging. So how this is a kind of quote from Sharon Ammond, who's the amazing director of the current Museum of London. But she thought of this building as a sort of urban think tank. They wanted it to kind of become a kind of activist in London's present and London's future. So this is a kind of a view of it from above. It's comprised of 3 buildings and an enormous basement with a train line which runs straight through it. So our approach was to not treat the building as a piece of architecture. It was to treat the building as the largest object in the collection. Okay, so it was the largest object in the museum, maybe item 7,000,001. And we wanted to use the market building to create content for the museum in a new way. So externally, in this kind of market houses, we suggested that they could curate external partners to come in and to allow the urban block to function as a kind of a content creator. So by inviting partners such as, our speculation was like the Royal College of Art, you could invite the Victorian Society, you could invite heritage associations, but also why not invite Google or DeepMind AI or something? So you create a kind of cluster, an incubator for new ideas, and the museum becomes a creator of ideas. And internally, our job, or let's kind of say, has been to curate the old market building, whereas externally we're trying to enable content creation. So these are just early sketches about what could happen there. And working with the existing building, we imagined that tenants who are partner organizations over time could change their facades. So the museum is a museum which is constantly in flux. So this kind of idea of the museum as a living exhibition of the city, changing ideas, movements, even physical objects, places to go and reflect and to see and debate. This is what we wanted the outside of the museum to kind of explore over time. We don't know what that will be because we don't know what which partners will eventually be involved and which will change year by year. Whilst that's happening on the outside, internally we're kind of, let's say, curating this enormous exhibit, which is the building, and making openings, installing kind of new ways of exhibiting, trying to kind of make bold moves in some places, and in other places really be respectful of the existing architecture. By retention of significant portions of the building fabric, we create a kind of layered view of history. So you get the present, and then you get the backdrop of history and different layers behind it. We're slowly kind of peeling back the onion skin in a way, allowing multiple views, multiple perspectives on this building and on the present. And we had this idea that anything can happen in these spaces inside. So by using exhibition design, they can tell the story of London. They can invite people to kind of become engaged and kind of part of the audience, become part of the exhibit in a way. So we don't know how they'll do that, but we're equipping the building to allow it to be used not only as a voice in itself, but the audience as well to get involved and inhabit that space. I'm going to take you now to a project in Korea. And this is a building for Hyundai. So whereas the previous one was an example of like an existing piece of architecture, this was a new piece of architecture acting itself as a piece of exhibition design. And here Hyundai wanted to express the idea of hydrogen. So this is the gas which they think will power, or let's say will be the alternative to kind of electrical powered cars. They'd like to do a hydrogen powered car. So they asked us to kind of find a way to introduce the public to hydrogen in a way that they hadn't seen before. If you imagine. A lot of research has gone into this hydrogen topic for Hyundai. Their scientists have been working on it for many years. The PhDs, like really, really researching this, developing these engines and hydrogen fuel cells. And the same goes on in museums, where like a topic is researched for many years. Someone might spend their whole life invested in a particular topic, and sometimes they're so invested in something, they don't really know anymore how to communicate it anymore because their knowledge is super, super, super specialized. And if they were asked to explain it to their mum or their kids, it would be impossible. And I sometimes think it's a bit similar to the relationship between like writers and script writers and filmmakers. That you can have a 1,000-page novel, which might take you 5 days or 2 weeks to read, and it's a very, very long experience. But the challenge of a filmmaker is to transform that very, very long form piece of information into something which can work with a person's attention, which is more like 2 hours or 1.5 hours. And often the role of the exhibition designer, working with the curator and the researchers kind of who have their PhDs and so on and their doctorates, is to help them transform their knowledge, which is super specialized knowledge, into something which a member of the public can grasp in like 10 minutes. And so sometimes we edit, sometimes we simplify things. And the goal is to create this sort of really to turn this information into something that can become like a story, something that can really people can grasp and then tell other people about. So hydrogen, the topic of hydrogen is a huge topic, but we said, well, let's just show people the night sky. And if they understand how beautiful the night sky is, and that all those stars in the night sky are floating spheres of hydrogen, they're individual hydrogen fuel cells, they'll understand the enormity and the beauty. So we painted this building with a nano coating called Vanta Black. So it became the blackest building on Earth, in fact. And going around this building by day, you saw a star field. You saw a building which appeared to be just a field of stars which moved in 3 dimensions as you walked around it, because they're all individually mapped to their correct kind of depth and brightness. We used information from the European Space Agency, the Gaia mission, where they mapped star directions and brightness. And so from the outside, people just felt in the daytime they were looking at outer space. And in fact, the location of the stars was accurate to if we had cut a hole in the sky and people were looking at us in space in that direction. And then actually we put a twist on it. We didn't use the exact star locations that they would be at this time. We mapped them to 2,000 years in the future, because 2,000 years is a sort of 2,000 years ago was the creation of the kind of the Korean nation mythologically. And so we imagined what would be 2,000 years in the future. It's like a kind of palindrome of astronomy. So people experienced that on the outside, this kind of one vision of hydrogen. And on the inside, they experienced another vision of hydrogen, which is hydrogen as water. So from black to white internally. And we created this surface, which looks like a kind of city, like viewed from above. And on this surface, tiny droplets of water, 20,000 droplets every minute, were dispersed. And each of them is like it's like a sort of vehicle of hydrogen moving around this cityscape. So people could create, by pressing kind of certain activation zones, they could create their own stream of tiny droplets, which would then go and interact in this kind of cityscape. Hopefully this video is working. And in the end, the 20,000 droplets, they coalesce to form a single pool of water in the center of the exhibit. You can see this here. You can hear this amazing soundtrack that was done by Wide Bird, which is a fantastic sound design company in Berlin. We worked with engineers, fantastic engineers, IARC from Switzerland, and then Hyundai themselves. So this kind of idea of collaboration with scientists, technicians, engineers, to create a kind of a new way of experiencing an idea, but without an object. The space itself was the exhibition, was the object. So that's what's kind of interesting. We kind of tried to do this approach again at the UK Pavilion in Astana, which is in Kazakhstan, which Caroline mentioned in her introduction. And here, the main topic of the exhibition, say that all of the countries were participating, was energy. And when we were thinking about it, we thought all of the countries will be promoting solar energy, like wind energy, hydropower, all of this kind of stuff, and demonstrating their technologies in that department. And we thought we should kind of get people to understand really what energy is from the beginning. So we started with a collaboration with Brian Eno, the musician. And Brian, if you haven't heard his music, it's you will hear some in a moment. Brian made a sound recording, and it starts with a sound of the beginning of the universe in his imagination. And it was like a single moment in time, like a single piece of energy, which then kind of fragments and becomes kind of diverse and multi-channel as you move through the exhibition. And we began with the beginning of time, let's say in kind of one theoretical physics kind of perspective, and a collaboration with Dr. Catherine Hymans, who's a fantastic astrophysicist who deals with dark matter at the University of Edinburgh. And we took people on a journey from energy to matter, the creation of hydrogen, helium particles, to the sun, so the kind of clustering of those particles, and then from the sun's energy to the Earth. And in the center of the exhibition, we constructed a structure which resembled the Kazakh yurt. The yurt is you could say like a really fundamental or archetypal piece of architecture. It's a nomadic architecture which allowed people to survive in a really complex, tough climate for thousands of years. And around this yurt, we created a panorama which was entirely digital. I'll explain kind of the yurt itself responded to human touch. The idea of kind of the role of the human being in transforming their environment. The sound you're hearing is Brian's soundtrack. And this is this kind of 50-meter long panorama, which is completely constructed in CG and rendered. It was rendered entirely in the cloud. It was a living panorama of like several million trees, landscape, weather features, rain, sun, had its own day and night cycle. And we created this kind of possible future world in which like a really archetypal piece of architecture, let's say one of the first structures human beings built, was put at the center as the most sophisticated piece of relationship man has ever had with his climate. There's kind of this idea that we have to look backwards to look forwards. So you see here the yurt in the center of the structure, and this panorama that wrapped around it. I directed this film. It's about a 10-minute long piece of computer graphics film. It's 40,000 pixels wide. So I moved kind of in kind of role from exhibition designer, architect into film director in order to be able to express the ideas that I had and the relationship between energy and human beings and where we are now and where we are in the future. And what's really interesting about this panorama, we engineered it to look like everywhere on Earth. It looks like Kazakhstan, it looks like Scotland, it looks like the USA, which has allowed the public to connect with it, to resonate with the ideas. But fundamentally, architecture was used as the exhibit in this exhibition. Architecture was the exhibit, just as with the Museum of London, architecture is the exhibit. There are no objects really in this exhibition. It's just experience and architecture. And in fact, because let's say the commissioner of the commissioner was so worried about that, they actually brought an object at the end because in order to put in the exhibition, because they felt that they needed one object. So they brought a light bulb in order to put in there to kind of close the conversation. But essentially, architecture as exhibit. Okay, so now we move to Africa and the exhibition at Die Neue Sammlung, and this was a sort of opportunity to bring together a lot of the ideas, a lot of things that we'd practiced, but at a completely different scale. And by working with, we were approached by Dr. Angelika Nollert, who asked us to contribute to the exhibition and to design it. And we were joined there with around 500 African ceramics, which are part of the collection of Dr. Franz, Duke of Bavaria. And alongside Dr. Nollert, we had Caroline Fuchs, who was the curator also working with us on the exhibition. We were the exhibition designer in our role, and also Dr. Joseph Stallard. So we had a fantastic group of people alongside Dr. Barbara Thompson as well, who was the curator of African ceramics, who's been working with Duke Franz for many years on this collection. So what could our approach be? We wanted to be respectful to the collection and respectful to the origins of each of these wonderful, wonderful objects. And it was the first time that they would be exhibited in a design museum. It's probably the first time an exhibition of African ceramics with this broadness of heritage, provenance, and kind of timescale has been shown in a design museum, or given the respect to be shown as works of art and design outside of like an ethnographic context. And this is like really a profound statement, I think, for the museum to make. So we understood that it's a complex idea, and in a kind of post-colonial context, it's something which is loaded with meaning and can be loaded with controversy. So we wanted to sort of make sure that the objects were treated with respect, and that we included, let's say, we included our approach of collaboration and an exhibition design and architecture all coming together in order to turn the experience of these objects into something that was really comprehensible and understandable in a way that it hadn't been done before. So this image showed the original archive in Dr. Franz's in Duke Franz's house, the archive of all of the objects. And so there were 250 objects selected from the total of these, around 4 themes: form, technique, materiality, gender and body, ceramics and markets, and contemporary. And so you had an enormous range and a great number of countries whose ceramicists were participating in this. So I think the work represents over 100 years of history, of objects which are used from a mixture from daily life to objects which had ritual use and kind of ceremonial use. So highly functional objects which were vessels containing food and water and beer even. The exhibition was over 2 spaces, and I hope some of you listening had the opportunity to visit the exhibition. This is the spaces as we found them at the beginning. This is the upper space, the rotunda in the museum. It's a naturally lit gallery on the 3rd floor of the museum. So this is the kind of first really powerful space that we were given. The second space was an artificially lit gallery on the 2nd floor. So we had these on the ground floor. Sorry, so we had these kind of 2 very different spaces to play with, really. Now, Barbara Thompson had been working with Duke Franz for over 20 years, and through her guidance, we started to imagine how her collection could be exhibited. Through a process of discussion and debate, we agreed that there could be 2 kind of distinctive experiences in those 2 spaces. So whilst in the rotunda, we thought we could exhibit the ceramics as though they were objects within the archive. The second was thinking about frozen movement, like how we could capture the way those objects were used in daily life. And like a piece of ceramic has weight and it has texture. It's affected by gravity, particularly when it has water in it or another liquid. So often in museums, we see them abstracted and put on a plinth. We never really understand what it feels like to use them. And unfortunately, we couldn't give every visitor the chance to pick these up because they're very precious, fragile objects. But we wanted to give that feeling. So we started to think about how we could bring the human body into the exhibition and make it understandable for people. We were also thinking about how the objects were stored and how they were used and how they were made. So in the ground floor gallery, we wanted to remind people that these were made from clay, and the clay had come from the earth. And it just hadn't come from any earth. It had come from a particular place and a particular time. And those places still exist. So this was, let's say, completing full circle. If you think about design, we always in a design exhibition, we're thinking about the resource, we're thinking about the aesthetics, and we're thinking about the functionality of something, we're thinking about how it's used. And we wanted to cover all of these bases. And through all of those, the visitor can understand the meaning. At the same time, we were developing an idea for how these ceramics could be displayed. Now, my mother is actually from Tanzania. So I grew up being surrounded by a lot of Makonde pieces. And these are wooden Makonde pieces, isn't it? You might have thought this was Picasso or Brancusi, but it's actually, these are Makonde artisans, Makonde artists from Tanzania and Kenya. That whole region is where this art form began and was copied globally. So we were thinking that since Makonde art has such a kind of powerful abstraction of the human body, maybe we could work with Makonde artists to create the mounts for the exhibition. So they could depict the human body in the form of in their art form, and we could use these depictions as sculpture to hold the pieces in the exhibition. And the gentleman on the right here is Ntaluma, who's a great Makonde artist from Tanzania. You also see that's me. You know me already, and you see Madalena Adondo, who's one of the greatest contemporary ceramicists in the world. Like you'll see her. You'd have seen her work in the exhibition if you had the opportunity to go. And there's some members of my studio who also designed and ran this exhibition. They kind of saw it through from beginning to end. So you have there Dan Sweeting, Peter Vaughan. You have Alex and Yola, and so it was a fantastic group effort from all of these people. We mapped the individual pots, and there were 10 pieces that Dr. Thompson selected, which best illustrated different uses of the pots, from storage to drinking vessels. And Ntaluma took careful measurements of each piece on a template, and he thought about, as an artist, how he would mount them, how he would depict their use as an artist. And we ended up with a very, very wonderful, expressive, and quite challenging, I think, curatorially, quite challenging aesthetically, collaboration between the past and the present. An artist from the past, an artist from the present. Like our Museum of London project is a collaboration between the architect from the past and us, the architect of the present. And all of these discussions over time, I find very interesting. Ntaluma used a timber called ironwood, and it was so hard that he had to use sometimes an angle grinder to carve the pieces into an exact fit. So there's a kind of a mixture of contemporary and traditional techniques. It was an extremely challenging process for the artists and the curators and the technicians from Die Neue Sammlung to accomplish. And so this was a really a kind of fantastic collaboration and challenging collaboration. It forced people to come together and cross bridges and to think about the new meaning of things, like what it meant to put these beautiful, spiritually very potent figurines in a Makonde carved piece, what it meant for us to look at it and what it meant for those to be exhibited. And often we feel when we're dealing with precious objects that we have to put them on a plinth and remove ourselves from the conversation because we're somehow contaminating the purity of them. But what we thought was very interesting, especially in the context of a design museum, is to enable a collaboration to happen and enable something new and breathtaking to come out of it. And I think this is a fantastic example of that. And within the rest of the exhibition, the remaining objects were arranged in this abstract form of archive or storage. And the idea was to illustrate how they were stored by Duke Franz as he kind of collected them over the years, and how we first encountered them when we first saw them in his store, which is above his house. He kept them very close to him because he wanted to look at them every day. And the exhibition layout worked with the existing structure of the building and this kind of archive shelving, but it also allowed people to experience these beautiful objects from every color with very uniform lighting and truly appreciate the level of craft, texture, color, and decoration, and somehow see them as a flat plane. It's kind of the indexical approach, whereas in the ground floor we took a very different approach. So the second space, again, we wanted to create another collaboration. We wanted to talk about landscape and where and how we could create an immersive exhibition experience which helped people understand the subject matter. So most of these pots, we learned, were made by female artisans, female artists. So that's women working with the land, taking clay from a place like this to a workshop, to their homes, sculpting the clay, firing it, and turning it, and then it going to a market. So we worked with a South African art photographer and videographer, Andy Mkoni, and we commissioned her through Design Indaba in Cape Town, which is a great design organization and design conference. We commissioned her through Die Neue Sammlung to go to KwaZulu-Natal and film the place where some of these pots originated, so where the clay came from. And so she produced a kind of a landscape still life, which is a kind of video which plays on a kind of loop. I don't know, several minutes. I don't know whether you can see this, but there's a yes, you see in the background there. It provides a context for the exhibition design, a context for each of these ceramics to connect with the land. So whereas in the upstairs exhibition we connected with the human body, here we connect with the land and with the clay that they're made from. And the reason to do this is about storytelling. We just wanted the story to be complete. By the projection of the wall of the gallery and the sound of the wind in the trees and the sound of the rainfall and the movement of the river, the backdrop brings these objects to life. And this serpentine display that we made, like this kind of curving path, it's meant to be a reflection of the river. It's not only allowing the objects to be viewed as a unified collection when we first enter the space, but it also reminds us, and the clay color that we've used, it reminds us that the ceramics are from the earth, they're from the ground. Now, what was very, very wonderful, and I think enormously challenging and a great accomplishment for the technicians and the curators here in the show, is that they agreed to have all the works exhibited in the room without glass. I don't think this is, maybe it's never been done before. It was done with great care and great respect to the objects, but also with great respect to the public. And the idea being that we wanted the public to almost be able to smell the life in these objects, that they're not removed from reality and put in this distant space. They're experienced in an intimate way, in a way that someone who's dealing with these and living with these objects in their daily life might have the opportunity to experience them. There is a subtle interplay of sound, movement, and material, alongside what I think was a great collaboration between curators, lifelong researchers, and artists. The exhibition, seek to accomplish, I think, a convergence and a new expression of the art form. And I think that's what we can do. Dr. Noller said to us that, what does it mean, a new perspective? It's a different way of viewing things. And it's precisely not a traditional way of viewing something different. Difference and diversity is a maxim and the ideal of a museum. And that's what we consider our greatest task. So I don't think we've had such an amazing collaboration in an exhibition design context in any of our projects. It was a most fantastic combining of intellects and art forms, and, as I said, like research and experience. And the whole idea was to give the public a new perspective. So just a final point, moving from that age of Instagram, which we're in at the moment, which is, I'd say, chaos and I believe crisis, absolute crisis. We need to remember that by working together and by supporting each other as exhibition designers, architects, curators, and researchers, we can tell the story of humanity in a new way, and we can learn for it and gain inspiration for the future. And that inspiration is critical to our future. Thank you. So
Thank you so much, ASIF. This was a very, very inspiring talk. Many, many ideas. There are some questions from the public. I also would like to start with one of my own, because when you mentioned you started with Crystal Palace, or it was not at the beginning, not the start. And when I now see you, and then you showed your other project and made me see them in a different way, I think what I think is that many of your structures are about perspective, actually, or about looking through. So Crystal Palace was a building that wouldn't case people in because you could look outside. It gave you a vista. And the portals very much give you different views and vistas. And the pavilion, the Hyundai pavilion, made you look at the sky, made you look at small scale. And I don't know if you agree, but I think this is something that's very crucial for your work, isn't it? Or am I wrong entirely?
So interesting. Someone, I think you're. I mean, you're the curator, so you can find these. You can find these things, and you're right. I think when I did the Portals project at Dubai Expo, which is unfortunately it's not open to the public yet, and if you go to Dubai in next October, you will see the 2020 Expo is in 2021 because of COVID, but you'll see it there. And someone has said to me, a close friend who's also a curator, has said to me, now I understand what you do. All your work is about mashrabiyas or screens, and I hadn't really thought about this before, but and I thought, okay, yeah, maybe it is. I think it's, for me, it's about this this pursuit of the infinite and trying to, whether it's at a miniature scale or at this kind of grand scale, create experiences which transcend our perception and our kind of existing reality. I think it puts people in a state of mind that allows them to absorb new ideas and to be in a kind of to imagine new things, to create new things themselves. So I'm very interested in doing something that can empower people through changing their consciousness. So I think you're very right, Caroline. It's definitely a repeating concept for sure.
And it's also about integration, isn't it? I mean, if you have a vista, you integrate the outside, and there's one question, especially to this point. One in the audience, there was a question. I read it out to you. One of the things that I personally appreciate about your work is your commitment to integration, different countries in one project. What shaped your views on this topic?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for seeing that. I think I grew up in a household where the common language was English, even though my father is from Pakistan and my mother is she's Indian but from East Africa. Many languages: Swahili, Urdu, Kutchi, Gujarati, and English was and Punjabi, and the English was a common language between us. And in my family, I have an aunt who's from Holland, and my kids are half Japanese, and my girlfriend is from Kazakhstan, and my office are the most diverse studio I think you could find. And I think what I believe is that by learning from each other, we don't just absorb information, we challenge our own perspectives of things, and our own, we grow. And I love to put myself in a scenario where I know nothing, and actually I'm learning from people around me. And I found the greatest learnings are from people who are the most different from us. So, we didn't know what the result would be of working with Interluma. And he was working, it was fantastic. He was going back, between Tanzania and Kenya, and then I think he did the work in both Lisbon and he's living, and he had some commissions, and also in Germany. He worked then with the fantastic technical staff in the museum, and there's something about the pleasure in seeing things unfold. That even though like one of the bad things about architects is we can be control freaks, right? We can really micromanage. We want to know everything and control everything. But I started to realize that there's more beauty in the things that we can't control and that we discover through these collaborations. And we learn, as I said, we learn so much through them. And I've been really enjoying to never stop being a student, to keep this kind of approach to life. Of course, I have students as well, but I think we all have to keep searching, and this is a way we grow.
Yeah, it's also about being open to receiving a lesson, even though you're not a student, isn't it? So, learning from something, even though you're not in the position to learn, maybe.
Yeah. So sometimes I find that, particularly in like professional life, and when you're doing public projects, and which we're doing, everything gets like everyone takes the approach of they kind of confuse as though risk and creativity are in opposites of each other, and they feel that everything needs to be predictable and the answers need to be given at the beginning, and you can't leave anything to discover or to create new processes. So I think what we're trying to do in our very large projects is to always bring in a bit of real life back into them, to stop it becoming like a kind of project management driven hell, but to let serendipity and chance and creativity and imagination to become part of it. And what you find is when you do that, of course, things happen people didn't imagine, but also the clients and the project managers, they realize that we're all human after all, and that we need those things. And they're very happy at the end. So it is entirely possible. I give you an example from the Expo project. We were asked, of course, because we're in charge of this public realm. There was a collaboration with an engineer who was making the canopies, these kind of shading canopies around the whole park, right, in the Expo Park in Dubai, and which are fantastic, really technically brilliant things, and they retract and whatever. And they asked me, what color should they be? The steelwork. What color should the steelwork be? And I said, I really don't know, but I met this artist who's the, let's say, like preeminent contemporary artist of the UAE, or like, let's say he was the first contemporary artist, a guy called Abdul Qadir Al Reis. He's a watercolorist. Maybe he's in his 60s. I said, I don't know the answer to what they should look like, but why don't we ask Abdul Qadir what color they should be? And of course, that's really scary because he could have come up with any answer, right? And I was having a discussion with him, like, perhaps they're the color of the trees, the trees that you find in the desert, like the gaff tree, the tree that is the hero of the desert. It feeds people when they're hungry. It kind of survives. It's an amazing thing. The roots are 50 meters deep. And I said, Abdul Qadir, why don't you show us your watercolor interpretation of what a gaff tree looks like? I need two colors from you, from a column and a beam. And he came up with this color, which they then matched with. They made this special industrial paint called gaff tree green and everyone said, "Oh no, it's green, but it should be gray. It should be, But once they painted it, it was the most beautiful thing. And the idea that the 500 steel columns in across 6 kilometers of public realm can be from the paintbrush of a watercolorist. You wouldn't imagine to bring those two things together, and the outcome, you wouldn't imagine it would be beautiful, but it worked. And even the story is amazing. Like, I have photos of him going and pondering which tree should we take the color from. And I think that's important to bring meaning into daily life, and to bring meaning to things that people forget need meaning. And I think that's part of it when we speak about exhibition design and how the architecture is the exhibition design. Like, that's what, in a way, that's what I mean. Everything's embedded with the manifesto. Everything should be embedded with the concept in these spaces. And at the end of that, it's just it's also such a pleasure to have those experiences in your life, where you get to meet these people and learn something from them. He gave me.
It reminds me of the hands, in the exhibition. That was something, without you, we would never have dreamed of doing something like that. and it was such a good experience. And it, as you said, it was a very good collaboration, but I think it worked because our technical team and the conservation team, they all saw the idea, I went to them and I said, no, sit down, and I'll have something ASIF Centre proposal, but don't freak out at once. And they were all like, no, I like it. I really like it. Let's try to make this happen. It was, and that's why it worked, and that's how it worked. I think everybody saw the idea or the good challenge in it, the positive challenge in it, and it was good to be challenged. And it's very good to be challenged as a museum.
And from a technical perspective, but also from a perspective of curation and like symbolic meaning, and whether you can intervene, like whether you can connect things together that weren't connected together. Like it's that idea of the fourth wall, breaking down the fourth wall in theater, like when the actor is it's suddenly in the audience space, and it's like it's a kind of moment of where you're not sure which version of the thing is real. And actually, this tension between contemporary discourse, which anyway is always changing, and people are coming with new ideas, and the past, and it has to be there actually for the work to stay alive. I believe. And maybe we don't get it right, but I think through the kind of, you don't always, you can't say you'll always get it right, but I think we try to have the don't have the fear to engage in that conversation. I think that's what's really important. And and I think also I'm very proud of the fact that project is such a great example of inclusivity and diversity in all respects. Particularly as this has become in the kind of creative in the world of museums, particularly, and our cities. It's been a great question. How are we including people? How are we allowing more diverse voices to be part of the conversation? And how do we tell stories of our history? We had people pulling down statues all over the world, and it's really important for that to happen. But before that, in our exhibition with you, we were exploring inclusion and exploring diversity, and trying to produce and commissioning new artists in South Africa, and through Makonde and contemporary film, and we did that because of the open-minded approach that you had at the museum, and I really applaud that. And we did it not because of needing people to think we were great. We did it because we thought it would create the most interesting and creative outcome for the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Yeah. So that's very true.
I'm always thinking of other people copy us a bit. There's so much more people can do with this approach.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, maybe one more question. I'm not sure. I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. But there's one question about your exhibition design and the way. I'll just read it. You have shown very convincingly how architecture can become an exhibit in the Hyundai building. In which way has your exhibition architecture been itself an exhibit in the Munich ceramics exhibition? Isn't it more difficult as soon as there are other exhibits evolved? So I think this is about,
Yeah. So for me, in that you have to, I guess, think of architecture as a scalable thing, and the role of the architect is a sort of our job is to provide the rhythm, and if we provide the rhythm, then the other musicians, in a way, can plug into it and follow that rhythm. And the objects are like that. The objects are the individual stories. And what we've created there is these two distinct spaces, let's say an archive and and this river, this flow of a river, with different color, different type of lighting conditions, different way the objects are seen, which puts you in quite a different frame of mind. And then we've dealt with these two topics: the body, and it's a kind of micro architecture scale, which is, the relationship between the hand and the object, and trying to get beyond the plinth, the traditional plinth, which is, I think, can be a curse sometimes of exhibition and object display. And then in the other space as well, it's not a plinth; it's a continuous surface, and allows all objects to be displayed in a continuum. But also it links to the idea of landscape and the origins of clay and water. So I think that's the architecture in those exhibits. And I think you could when this show was empty, before the objects were put there, and this river was moving through the space, and we had just the video on the wall, it also worked. It had meaning. It had potency. You were like, "Wow, this is an amazing experience of a river in South Africa." And of course, when you add the objects, it gets even deeper, and you start to make new connections. But often a room of empty plinths is nothing. So this was a very beautiful and surprising thing. But I think that's really what the architecture is.
And in the end, if it works, it's like a good conversation between the objects, between the architecture, between the exhibition design. Yeah. So they all add their voices. Yeah.
And also the human bodies in the exhibition. You're always seeing many people against the ceramics. You see people behind and in front, and so they become like part of a human scenery. Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, it's kind of the world they belong in. They are precious, but it's such a great opportunity to show them outside of the glass case and in the human context.
Yes, no, that's very important, I think. Yeah, not trying to distance them as much as possible. Yeah. All right. So thank you very, very much, ASIF. I'm afraid our time is more than up. But thank you very, very much. It was fantastic talk, very inspiring, and fantastic to see you at least on the screen. And I hope we can do this again sometime in person. And all the best to your studio. Thank them again for the fantastic work. And I hope everybody is well. And
we really appreciate the opportunity to be involved in such a great exhibition. And thank you to the audience for your patience and taking the time to join us tonight and to ask the questions and participate. So thanks so much for that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay, before we go offline, just a few announcements. If you're interested in other programs, we started an Instagram series during the COVID season with short guided tours. Maybe you want to look into that. And there are actually 3 exhibitions opening until December at the museum. And the museum is open, so we hope to see you online. We hope to see you in the museum. All right. So another huge thanks to you, ASIF, to the studio, to everybody who made this talk possible, and wishing you all health and safety. And thank you for joining us. Good night.
Stay safe.